What's up, everyone? Today we're going to be working on the 455 Torque King. Now, a lot of you guys are new to the channel and you probably don't know or don't know the whole story about the 1971 Buick GS. Now, when that thing was sold to me, it was sold as a stage one, had the air cleaner for 455 in it, and I wasn't able to get the hood open. And I'll be honest with you, I'm definitely by no means a walking encyclopedia or library on Buick. It's just something about their lines, though, especially 60s, 70s. You know what? We'll even go as to say 1975 and earlier are like every Buick that came out had something spectacular. Whether it was the Super 8s or pretty much anything they came out with just had presence. And when I can't remember exactly, this was 13, 14 years ago, 15 years ago now. I can't remember now. It was a long time ago. We had a storm come by and it knocked the tarp off the car that you guys see right here. The car was a mess, but after 13 years of really wanting to get it, it finally was able to come home with me. And I was so over the moon that we had this thing. I did a lot of research, and with it being a stage one and everything, the thing was a Hemi killer. It was truly the king of the road in 1970. Unfortunately, when I first got it, you couldn't open the hood, and all you could really see was that it had the air cleaner in it. And we're talking barely able to open the hood more than that. And I was just totally devastated. Not to say that this Buick 350, this is an SP block. This is a 1970 Buick SP block. This was the wrong engine for the car. It doesn't have the right VIN. It's not the right stamping year. So something happened to the Buick that they didn't tell me about. And going into digging further into the car, it definitely had an accident, and most likely that's what claimed the original engine. Now, this engine right here is a really awesome engine on its own right. This is a 1970 SP block high compression 350. It's definitely more of a horsepower engine than a torque engine. Whereas you go to this guy right here, and this is what was supposed to be, 71. This is a 70. This is what was supposed to be in my 1971 Buick GS. This was the reason why I was just really over the moon to be able to get this engine. Now, I have a few favorite engines that you can get, and it's because they're very odd. They do different things very effectively. And then I have one engine that I love because I hated it for the longest time. I thought it was the stupidest thing ever. And then, well, quite honestly, those LS style engines are truly just tanks. The engineering that has gone into this for being a pushrod engine is really spectacular. Then you have the 383 super overbore engine. I love these old 383s, and I'm looking forward to eventually building this one for a 71 Roadrunner that I don't own, but it's one of my dream cars. And then those two right here, these are actually probably my favorite engines just because of how light they are. I can lift that engine up. That's a 1UZ FE. That's a 93. That's a 92. This is going in my 89 Supra. And then the one that is more like, you look at those two, they're more like a surgical knife. That right there is just a very interesting, very, capable of doing some phenomenal things because it's so over square. And then somehow Buick, long before the 1UZ, long before the LS, they were able to make a surgical knife that was also a club. And that was this engine right here. And, as you can see, time travel back, you can see what the block looked like as we were starting to get into it. And now we're back to it. You can really see she's really not that bad. She's a bit dirty, sure. But if you really look at it, it's an old engine. There's very little sludge throughout this block. This block was very well maintained. May have missed a few oil changes here and there, but on a whole, there's some really impressive parts to this. It's a very light engine. It's a whole almost 2 inches shorter from front to back than the 454 sitting on the ground right here. And we'll do a comparison between the two blocks. Now, this is a newer one, but just think the water jackets would be a lot smaller if it was a 70 block. And it's about 1.5 inches shorter than the 440 you see over there. Now, I actually thought that these things looked a lot closer between the 350 and the 455 than they actually are. And they're world different. The first thing, if you're looking at it, besides the fact the intake manifold on a 440 doesn't say anything, and 455, the 350, that one actually, original one would say 350 on the back of it. The valve covers would have 3, these have 4. We'll do a video on the differences between the 350 and the 455. We'll do a video between the blocks and the heads on the 440, the 455, and the 454. We'll do all those in different types of series, because we still need to tear down the 440 so we can actually look at it. There's some really cool differences though. Originally, when I was looking at the 440, I was, all Mopar heads have a very quick exit from their head. They're, just phenomenal. One of the things that, kind of the same with this monstrosity. Those heads are freaking monsters. They are huge. And Buick, they did something a little bit different. They basically did the same thing, really quick to get out of the vast majority of the head. It leaves the head very quick because it goes into these cast runners, which is interesting because it allows it to get it away. I don't know if that really saves too much in the way of weight, and it's a very different way of doing it. But if you can kind of see, I don't know if you can, before it hits this, it leaves the head very quickly. So hopefully, that helps draw the heat away from the main part of the block. Though eventually, just like, having cast manifolds, they hold heat. Just like, I love food. Those cast iron skillets hold heat. So don't cast iron heads. So if you switch these over to aluminum, oh my God, think of the benefits this is right here as it cools down as the heat is exiting. I actually wasn't the most thrilled with how this happened, but when I was talking to Tall John from Tall John's Fun Shop, I was starting to have like the gears turn inside my head. That, that's actually pretty sweet. So we'll have all of the teardown right after this little going through everything. But another great thing that Buick did, of course, is they had a way of separating the hot engine from your intake manifold. Is it 100% amazing? It definitely doesn't beat an aluminum intake manifold. But this right here is a phenomenal thing because it helps prevent, at least for a time, your cast iron intake manifold from heat soaking, which of course, unlike when you get into those really awesome thermoquads that Carter was making for the Chrysler lines, you have a lot of heat being transferred up through your intake manifold and into the actual carburetor. Again, you can see this is a SP3 intake manifold from TA Performance. How not only do you get that valley pan protecting it, but you also have an air gap in your intake manifold. It generally happens with their single plane. Now, LS engines, you can get them carbureted, and because they are very similar to the way that the Hemi would actually have a nice little valley pan covering that whole area just separately, same with that, it helps isolate the block from your intake. And of course, fuel injection, totally different. You can't run those uncarbureted, but you get a similar kind of mentality as Buick with these 383s. You get that nice pan going inside here. It's one of the reasons why I really love Mopar's big blocks. And of course, if you kind of see, of course, there's a 440, not a 383, but same concept. The only downside that I've seen so far with the valley pans you get with the Mopar ones is they're directly exposed to the elements, which of course I buy engines from salvage yards. And things generally like to live in that area, and it just eats through it and it goes inside the engine. That's actually one of the reasons why the 440 that's inside the garage and has seized up pistons and has a lot of issues. Not the greatest design because it's not protected, but still the benefit of that is you get a much better reduction of transfer of heat into the actual intake manifold. So as far as that goes, phenomenal. Really love those kind of mentalities, and you find that in the Buick. This thing, like I said, is like in 1970 they managed to develop a, well, actually prior to that, because you have the 430s and the 400s. I prefer the 455s. It's just I know the expression, there is no replacement for displacement. There's RPMs, there's turbos and all this stuff, but there's no replacement for displacement. It's an over square block or bore stroke, phenomenal engine. More for torque though, definitely. That's more your horsepower. This is more your torque. You can actually, that right there has around 20 less horsepower than this engine, but this has like 200 more foot-pounds of torque. Torque king. So you get a lot more on-demand power. So, hey, we actually found out something really neat with this block, and we'll go through the entire thing. One, we are not going to be using the original main bearings because you get TA Performance makes substantially better ones, allowing for better oiling throughout the system. The actual pistons are in phenomenal shape. Like, guys, this engine was in such good shape. It definitely needed to be pulled apart. We had some issues. Someone did a timing chain replacement. There was some RTV that is not original, as well as the water pump had a little bit of RTV, but they didn't protect the bolts going through it, and the timing cover was damaged. So it was, and there is a little bit of gunk of oil buildup, more in the galleys than anything else. But as you can see, it's only really where the oil had nowhere to go. You had a little bit of oil probably sitting and cooking off in those areas. But as it goes on a whole, a very clean engine. Very, very interesting to find that we took our little ring spacer right here, and you can see you take a ring, you put it in here. I pulled the ring off of cylinder number 1, and I kind of went through there. I'm going to take the rings off the actual pistons because they're in really good shape, and if they're all as good as what happened right here, we might be able to save a couple $100 and use the rings that were already broken into this engine. But you set this up here. This is not a ridge reamer. Here we go. So you get that on there. It's better to do this with 2 hands. You tighten it up. Oh, geez. Hold on a second. There you go. So you tighten it up. You, oh, a little too tight. Hold on a second again. Okay. Leave yourself a little bit of playroom there. So I put a ring along here, and I was able to get it approximately 1/8 of an inch down, right on the ridge. The ridge is, when I say non-existent, I mean I kind of might feel something with the pad of my finger, but we put it on there and it's 0.028, which is a little bit excessive. But if you were, say, we want to throw boost through this engine or nitrous down the road, that is not, it's not a bad thing, especially seeing how a lot of people say around 25 is where you're going to want to be with this particular engine. Which you then push your ring down with this. This will then line it up to the actual, so it's nice and perpendicular to the surface. So because it's, again, check it out, 0.028. I'm like, okay, there has to be some type of taper to this bore. It's never been opened up and it's never been messed with. So I take one of my, actually these are for the 1UZ FEs. They're the really cool spring or ring compressors. I just slid this in here and I put a piece of steel on it, the actual bore, pushed it up with the ring, and then just kind of rolled it around until it was nice and level inside there. Pulled it all back off, checked it. This bore, I mean, unless I put one of the, we can always put a gauge in there and see, well, we'd probably go with the smaller one, and see just how round it is and stuff like that. But just doing a rudimentary check, it's straight. I've never, I'm impressed. I'm highly impressed, especially for the age, how old, if you guys know how much nickel is in these blocks, I'm very intrigued. But there are some issues. It did sit for a very long time, so as you can see through there, this is completely seized up, and we definitely have some coolant passageway issues. So I knocked out each one of the core plugs, and we'll be able to go through and clean it up. Now these bolts did break, so we'll have to weld some nuts on those, get those out. So we'll also have to hunt down some appropriate bolts. We have to also find a timing cover for it. And tomorrow we're going to go ahead and do clean and deburr. We need to scrub this engine really, really nice. We need to remove all the casting artifacts, and then we are going to do a very light hone on here. We just want to knock off any type of, you know, foreign debris, as well as give the actual bore a nice clean structure for the rings to run down. As far as these rings go, I talked to a couple people like John Wilburn. I'm pretty confident in them, and he said, yeah, I wouldn't lose sleep in them either. So, and I can show a few other issues we have with the cam. Obviously, we're not going to reuse that, but some weird artifacts, some weird scoring that to me really feels like it was maybe rusted. And I kind of went on a bit of a spiel on, you know, the only thing inside your engine that has a surface you have to worry about is not like just your piston rings. A lot of people were upset that I didn't use a little bit of some type of oil inside here before I started the first time. And I go through that in the later part of this video, so we'll leave it for that. So yeah, we just have to go ahead, clean this black off. Casting artifacts, any sharp edge, we want to knock that down. The reason why you're going to want to knock any sharp edge down, just like an airplane. There was an airplane, I can't remember the exact one. It had square windows, and they had tons of structural failures because of fatigue cracks throughout the hull. And it came from any type of sharp edge, something, especially in an engine that's this engine is very thin cast. They were very conservative in their manufacturing of these things. So anytime you have any type of flex, if you have a sharp edge, it will literally focus that flex on the edge, and that's where you will start to get cracks. So we'll go through that. We will girdle this engine and a few other things, but guys, this was a phenomenal engine. It's a bittersweet because, quite honestly, other than the weird timing cover issue, this engine and a little bit of the oil galley will scrub them out. But yeah, this engine probably would have been happy to run for another 40,000 miles, another 20 years, or anything along those in between. So, but we want this thing to be performance now, so we have to go through and really go ham on it. So, yeah, we'll have to go through. I want to get the stage 1 valves for it. We'll do a light port job on the heads, unless we can somehow, you know, get our hands on a set of aluminum heads with all that already taken care of. But yeah, we're nice and organized. Everything has been bagged. This is Unfortunately, the timing cover was damaged, and then as we were pulling it off, it got a little bit more damaged. So we're going to go ahead and attempt to find a replacement one. Unfortunately, what happened was someone either got in here to change the timing chain or something along those lines, but when they did a little bit of damage to the timing cover, and then these 3 bolts were completely seized up. They didn't put anything on the bolt to protect it from any type of galvanic corrosion, and unfortunately these 3 were 100% seized through it, and they broke about an inch and a half. So after about an hour and a half of fighting with the timing cover, I actually think the GoPro died at one point. I don't know. Unfortunately, that was a terrible thing. But we'll get another one. They ranged between $300 or $250 and $500 for the real high-end ones. But if we could find a new old stock, or even just a really nice used one, I think that would be perfect. Now, it's the same one as the 400 and the 430, so they should be fairly plentiful. As far as what else is going on, we just gotta kind of sneak this cam off and see what we're working with here. Oh, okay, so this one, it would appear, yeah, there we go. She was kind of give us a bit of a hard time, but she came off. So let's go ahead, pull this off, and check the lobes. Now, we'll go through this in a little bit. One of the reasons why I'm not doing a lot of talking in this one, and we'll kind of reconvene in a couple parts here, is we are working inside the basement, and well, the kids are running around during the day, and even though I love them to death, I don't think you guys want to hear them screaming and carrying on. So they are awesome though. We're just gonna pop this out, and I'm kind of getting mixed vibes with how well this thing has been maintained. It's had a little bit of sludge in the oil pan, not too terrible, and it had a little bit of sludge throughout the heads. I'd say this would be a fairly well maintained engine. Not 100% meticulous, but definitely a fairly well maintained engine. All right, let's see how lucky we get here. Oh. So this actually is very interesting. The cam looks great. There's, it's a well-used engine, but only two cam lobes look weird. They kind of got a little bit hot. And as far as what's going on here, it's got some weird artifacts from something. I removed them going straight down. I didn't scratch them, taking them in or out. So I don't know where they would have come from. Very odd. Definitely got hot right along the edge on both of these. Comment section down below. Do you think if there was rust on these lobes, if that could have caused that? I haven't seen that kind of artifact before. But I don't think it would have had any real long-term effect on the engine. But one of the big things, of course, is you want to start your engine up real quick. That's why I prime the fuel bowls. And that way we have a very quick startup. So you don't want the thing to cold crank. It's not particularly a good idea. You want your engine to get oil pressure pretty quick. Now, the alternative to that, of course, is if you have the tool to be able to prime it, you can make your own tools and things like that. But unfortunately for the Buick engines, I don't. For the 318 I do, and my buddy has one for the old Chevy 350s. So prime your engine if you can before a long time in between starts, say 30 years, 15 years, or whatever. But it was weird because we did a bore scope on all of these cylinders and they all looked really good. There is some wear in it from just going up and down. There is absolutely no ridge to them. It's fantastic. Basic hone, knock the surface so it has a nice hone on it, and this block will be ready to rock and roll. Still bring it to machine shop, get it completely cleaned out. We still need to get all the oil passageways taken out. We have some, I don't know if you can see it in there, but yeah, just take a look at that. I don't know how well you can see it, but yeah, very clean. But you can see we also have some water, sitting inside the block, causing issues like that. We need to clean those out. It has pretty nice coolant passageways. We have to make sure they're all open though. This is a really nice block. It's just a great candidate, and we got very blessed, bittersweet blessing, but very blessed with the condition of this engine. Now, one of the reasons why I bore scope and I don't put anything down in there, my concern is I want the engine to start first time and I want it to run right. So we check the carburetor, make sure it's distributing the fuel appropriately. It doesn't have any weird bad. But I don't put anything in there because I want the combustion to be correct. Now, I know it's controversial. It's just the way I do it. I've had very good success with it. The only time I've had an engine not succeed in surviving more than 500 miles after startup was when I used to not bore scope it. I did the whole let your engines, your cylinder sit with Marvel Mist Oil in it for a week. Then I vacuumed them out, and then I let them cold crank a little bit, a few times, just to get the compression to kick whatever was left out. And it still didn't run right for a while, like maybe 10-15 minutes. And after that, the 318 and the old 81 Ram worked beautifully up to about 500 miles where it ate itself. And the car went before it sat. My family owned the car. It ran beautifully. It had, I think, 78,000 original miles, not first time around. It was a work truck. Had no problems when it sat, except for the main transmission gasket leaked. That was it. So yeah, that was the only time I didn't have a successful time with the engine long term. My concern is longevity of an engine. Now, we would never have pulled this engine apart if they had no problems inside the A-pillars in the Electra, but it is what it is. So not only do you have to get the oil to your cam lobes very quickly so you don't have to worry about something along those lines, you have just your rockers, you got the engine flow or oil going through the engine. Again, you can always prime the engine. It's a good way of doing it if you have the specialty tool. But something that goes kind of forgotten about. Now, another reason is you don't get the only lubrication you get in the top of the cylinders from the fuel itself, which does have some lubricating properties. Other than that, all your lubrication's on the bottom side of the engine. And that's one thing that people kind of forget about. Now, this is a bad example, but I'm going to show it anyways. This is, an engine, say, sitting for a very long time. Will it run? You see how much this thing doesn't want to move inside. This is out of one of the 383s. It was actually the one that was in the best shape. And eventually, as lubrication is splashed up there, it probably be, it would be what it was. And unfortunately, in the process there, you'd have some heat. This is another example. This is a piston out of an engine that hadn't run in a long time, and as you can see, it doesn't do anything. Now, this one's not nearly as bad as the 383, but moving side to side, pretty rough. And as you start to get it to move, now she's starting to get back to rock and roll. Now, I hit it with a little bit of the power lube prior. Now, this one, none. This was pulled out of an engine that was running last year, and as you can see, I know there's different clearances. For example, these are both floating, that is not. But something that a lot of people forget about is your wrist pins. Engine sitting and not running for a long time, we're not reusing this can, but an engine sitting for a long time not being used, your wrist pins are going to get dry. Putting a little bit of oil on top of your cylinders isn't really going to help that. So yeah, that's why I don't do it. I prefer having the oil go through the engine naturally, like it would when you're driving. And I might be wrong. You yell at me in the comment section. That is perfectly fine. I've had very good success that way, and I will continue to do that. But there's a lot of moving parts inside your engine, not just your piston rings. So crank it by hand, which the very first thing I did before I agreed to buy the car was I checked the oil, and I made sure that it would crank by hand. 1-2 rotations, nothing more than that. But that's just to make sure that you don't have any issues with piston rings. If you can do a quick bump, if say you can't get to, for some reason you can't get to it, do a quick bump with the starter, without spark plugs in it, just to, get it to see what it does. Not the best option, but it's an option. So that's one of the reasons why your wrist pins are, any of your surfaces inside your engine are going to be critical. So it's more important to get the oil flowing throughout the engine, in my opinion. And again, yell at me in the comment section. But these cylinders were just absolutely beautiful, and I didn't see any reason to spray anything down there to change the combustion of the engine. We wanted to snap start, and once we figured out the ignition, the engine did start right up. So the last thing is we got to pull the crank, the pistons, set them up here, and then we have to examine the block. So far, other than there is a little bit of goo on the side of the engine, on the china wall, things like that. Like I said, I'm fairly confident this was a fairly well-maintained engine. Not perfectly maintained, but a fairly well-maintained. If you look at the heads, I have to go over there. The heads are grimy on the outside, but a little bit of, I didn't change oil maybe a few times. Nothing like we had over to our, like that, this thing right here, the under the valve cover is immaculate, like totally immaculate. So this 440 was a very low mileage engine, came out of a truck that, I don't know, maybe it never ran, but I was told that the truck did run. They had no problem with it. I just don't, maybe it was really well maintained. Maybe it was freshly rebuilt. I don't know, we'll have to look into that. But this thing, this one missed a lot of oil changes. This was a very rough engine, and this is of course, bag number 2, bag number 1. Every single bolt has its own Ziploc bag, set wise. So all your oil pan bolts, things like that. We need to go through. We need to run an ultrasonic clean on these, wire brush them, and then I might reach out to a buddy of mine to get some type of coating on them because we want to protect them. So yeah. I'm gonna let you go and so you guys can watch the actual teardown, but look forward to having a side-by-side comparison, heads, blocks, valves, pistons, and stuff like that between, in my mind, the three. I'm not a Ford guy, so the 3 big blocks that I really, really like. I also have other pistons that we can compare it to, like Toyota Supra piston. Very interesting. Maybe not to you guys. I think it's interesting, but yeah. So we have a lot of things we can compare. Oops, sorry, that was probably pretty bright. But yeah, I'm gonna let you guys get to enjoying the the actual teardown of the block. So you guys have yourself a wonderful, enjoying time, and we'll catch you on the flip side of the video.